We are going to go to the world of college football. We're going to go to my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, where the Ohio State Buckeyes lost their fourth consecutive rivalry game to, I call them Michigan. I don't call them like that team up north or cross out the M in Benjamin or anything like that. But so Ohio State lost to Michigan, and it's created this dilemma, especially considering it was such a bad Michigan team. I mean, they were 6-5 entering the game, probably the worst Michigan team in a couple of decades. And there have been some bad ones, but this is an Ohio State team that was, I think, favored to win the national title entering this game. And so, whereas Ohio State's lost these three previous games, you could always point to the fact that Michigan was good teams. I think they went to the playoff in each of the 3 years they beat Ohio State. And so there was always that caveat. But now Ohio State has a Ryan Day problem. And I don't mean that in terms of Ohio State should fire him, although I have my own thoughts on the matter. But there's definitely this perception that Ryan Day cannot beat Michigan. And so it's led to, I think, and we'll talk about this with Sean's, like it's interesting the way that coach firings and coach hot seats get enter the discourse, I guess. And so it's like a year ago, if I would have said Ohio State's should fire Ryan Day, that would have seemed pretty crazy. He's like 66-10 overall, regardless of what his record is against Michigan. Ohio State's still going to be in the college football playoff this year because it expanded to 12 teams. And so a year ago, the conversation seemed crazy. Well, this year it seems a little less crazy because now he's lost to a bad Michigan team. It was a really, really ugly, like brutal loss that of all the, you can watch football and you can say, like, I blame the quarterback, I blame the defense, I blame the head coach. This one felt squarely on the head coach. And so come Monday morning, like that was a natural talking point on all the talk shows is should Ohio State fire Ryan Day? And so I thought what was interesting about the conversation is that people who don't follow college football all that closely still think it's a crazy conversation. And the people who do follow college football pretty closely, they don't only think it's a real conversation. They kind of seem to think that Ohio State should fire Ryan Day. So I found that dynamic really interesting, where you have, guys like Dan Lebitard and Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon saying, this is crazy. His record 66-10. How could you fire this guy? And then you have guys like Paul Feinbaum and Colin Cowherd, although we can debate how much Colin Cowherd knows about college football after what he said about USC over the weekend. But you have them saying, Ohio State probably should fire Ryan Day. And so, like, I don't know. First of all, where do you guys come out on this? Because I know you both are college football fans, but you're not Ohio State fans like I am. Like, do you think this is a crazy conversation?
I'll say I am always a be careful what you wish for person when it comes to firing coaches. I'm dating myself here, but I remember when Nebraska fired what's his name, the guy after Osborne, who went he was like 10-2, like 11-1.
Bill Callahan?
No, it was the guy who he coached at Ohio for like 15
Frank
years.
Solich.
Frank Solich, yeah. So they fired Solich because he was slightly less successful than Osborne. And then you just look at the trajectory of Nebraska football from that point forward. Obviously, there are examples that are very different to that, but I don't know. As someone, as a Syracuse fan, so someone who understands the value of sticking with the hot hand, I can appreciate the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry and the importance of that. And I think it's really cool. It's one of the few things that we are still holding on to traditionally in college football these days. And I appreciate that hatred is there. But I just have such a hard time. It's such all right, like if you're going to fire this guy, the next guy better be Urban Meyer 2.0, or else, it makes such an assumption that Ohio State is just guaranteed to be a national title contender every year, no matter what, which you don't have to go that far back to see Ohio. That's not true. So that's my take.
What do you think? Do you think this? Am I just an insane Buckeye fan, Brendon? I mean,
maybe.
am.
I mean, I think my mind goes the same place as Sean, sort of, which is that I think that some of this is just a byproduct of the intensity of this rivalry, right? Like, I don't think it's a far jump to think of the way the Jim Harbaugh narrative played out, right? I mean, it was like that's the reason he was going to get fired. He led up like what was like almost 120 points over 2 years right before the pandemic in those 2 games, and then finally beats them in 2021, I think. So it's like, I mean, some of that maybe is being the little brother, and maybe that's why he got more leash, and it was inevitable that if a coach on the other side started to slip, that the hammer would come down a little bit harder. I think it's just the stakes of what, honestly, it kind of reminds me of, it's not a first year coach or anything, but like what Gerard Mayo is dealing with in New England a little bit, where it's just like the stakes become so outsized that it's like he's a first year coach with a terrible roster. And I know Ohio State was the favorite. I understand that is the difference, but I just think the coverage of Gerard Mayo has been so harsh where it's like, I just think if you're the big brother, the big bad wolf, the dynasty, and you slip, the guy who is deemed to be the kind of reason for that, or the figurehead of it at the very least, kind of is going to bear the brunt of it. But I do think the idea of coach hot seats and media is, I mean, it's almost entirely caused by media. It's like that's just all that it is, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's kind of another interesting angle to all of this, is that the national media is at least turning on Ryan Day. Like this is now becoming a conversation that's coming up on debate shows. Whenever Ohio State's playing in the playoff game, this will be a conversation that surrounds it. The local media, though, has not really shifted. Like the local media is still defending Ryan Day. I don't know if that's an access thing. I don't know if that's a college football thing. But the local media is still like in like a pro Ryan Day camp. And so
if that's true, then he's safe, right? I mean, are they going to let, people on ESPN make the decision?
I don't think it's necessarily reflective of the fan base. And so I think the two wild cards of this are going to be boosters and how they feel about it, and how Ryan Day feels about it, because he seems miserable in this job. Like, I don't know if you guys saw that clip from the coaches show last week where he was saying like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to his family, him losing to Michigan. And he was likening it to his father dying when he was a child. Like he seems miserable. Like, this is not a good job for him, I don't think. And so the
clip of him dazed during the fight was saying what happened. It was like, check on him, please. Somebody
I almost
get him
wonder
some medical attention.
If it's to your point, does the national sports media overrate the Ohio State Michigan thing versus go ahead.
I think they get it right. I think they're the ones, just as somebody who grew up in it. Like, I think like Ohio State could still win the national title. And I'll tell you right now, there are fans who would rather have beaten Michigan than win the national title. I'd actually say that to most fans. And so like, it's just like having grown up in it. And I grew up during the John Cooper years where every year was like this one, where Ohio State comes into it to the favorite and they find a way to lose in embarrassing fashion. I went to school during the Jim Tressel years, and so Ohio State's just dominating the rivalry. I covered Ohio State during the Urban Meyer years where they're dominating the rivalry, and now it's just all flipped again. And so like, there's just this intensity in this rivalry where even if Ohio State wins the national title this year, there's going to be an asterisk on this season for a lot of Ohio State fans, and this team will never be as beloved as the 2002 or 2014 team. And so it's I don't know why the national media seems to get that part of it like right. And maybe that's just unique to like guys like Paul Feinbaum and Colin Cowherd who are steeped in some of this stuff. But I do think the national media actually gets it right.
So maybe the point is, even though you literally said they could win the national title and people would still not be happy, it becomes a question of, can Ryan Day keep sending Ohio State to the playoff? And what happens that one year he doesn't when they lose to Michigan? And that, to me, is kind of like, all right, now we have our reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's to that point, his record, again, it's 66-10. He's never had like a truly embarrassing loss to a team Ohio State had no business losing to, other than this Michigan team. But Ohio State almost lost to Nebraska this year. And oh boy, like that, you would have seen calls for his firing had they lost in Nebraska. So I think you're right. Like, I think everyone's kind of there, and there's just enough to still justify keeping him in terms of making the playoff for a lot of people. And so I think that's another interesting angle to all of this is now that the playoff has expanded to 12 teams, are we just going to see like less high profile firings? Because logistically, Ohio State could not fire Ryan Day right now when they're getting ready to conceivably compete for a national title. But I've rambled on this long enough. Do we want to, Brendon, do we want to touch on like the fights or anything? Because that was a pretty big topic too.
I mean, we do have Sean's stock watch to get to.
Okay, let's skip it. We'll pause it that.
Well, let's stop talking about this
Let's
potential.
hope more college football teams fight each other next week, and then we'll return to it, Ben.